Alright, so this video is meant to be more of a cohesive bookend to the series, a little bit going more in depth on my final thoughts of this game and my problems with it. First of all, though, you'll see I've started a new game, and this was sort of meant to test my theories of how to actually play the game and be successful at it. And as you can see, I'm doing pretty damn well. I am at year 10, well, 11 now, for this vineyard. And all I'm doing is growing Chardonnay. And with a forest in the middle, I am working on getting increased yields. I have got a worker's hut with the spraying tools available, and I was going to buy a tavern next so that I can build up my renown for upgrading my estate and going from there. I have purchased a lake here, and that was for my attempt at Phylizera. I'll get to that in a minute because this is a complete waste of money. So I think for me, and I mentioned this probably in the first, maybe second episode of this series, my largest problem with the game was essentially not knowing how to play, and that largely is a combination of my fault for not going in depth in the manual, but also the game's fault for having hidden information and obscuring said information. One example is the finances of this game. Your latest financial report is of the previous year, not the current year, so you do not get to see what is going on. Now, in all fairness, as I am making this video, there was an update to this game that was released where, apparently, and I don't actually see it here, maybe I have to start a new game, where it made it so that you can see your monthly income and expenses and all of that. You can actually now see your real-time or your live changes, which, to me, are kind of important, because it gives you, being able to see, going into this real time, what is costing you what, allows you to actually manipulate it a little bit during the current year, rather than waiting to the end of the year to see what the hell all my money went towards. I don't understand why this was not a thing from the beginning, personally. If we look at other games that I have played, Zeus comes to mind in particular. Zeus is a city building game, yes, but it has management stuff like this, and it has a financial screen. That financial screen breaks down your current and your previous expense reports, so that you can see your income now and your expenses as compared to the previous year or month or whatever it is. That is incredibly useful. I don't see why in a tycoon game, a management game, you would hide that information. It seems... I really don't understand that. I mean, it's not the only thing I don't understand about the decisions made in this game, but real-time anything would be important for management, because management games are about information. It's about macro-level management. One thing, too, while we're on this menu, you see property sales. Now, that tells me that it is possible to sell a tile. How you do that, I don't know. And in fact, if you look in the manual, and it talks about tiles, the manual actually basically says that whatever you pick is you're stuck with it, except for the ability in the workers' abilities to clear out forests for land or plant forests on clear land. Also, the only way to get rid of anything on your tile here, your crop, is to basically let it die. And the only way that happens is with Phylizera. So, basically, in my opinion, at least early on in the game, in a scenario like what I've got right here, for example, I'm growing Chardonnay, which early on in the game is doing me pretty well. It's a very basic crop, it's very easy. The only reason I was thinking of putting a tavern here is just because it came up cleared land, of which I have none, and I was spending a lot of money just to get cleared land for this, and that's another thing I'll touch on here. But having 5 Chardonnays, I think, is just perfectly fine. But eventually, I may want better crops. I may want, say, Sara, which seems to do a little bit better because it's a more expensive crop. That leads to its own little problem, though, that I'll touch on. But there is no way to clear this out. there is no way to change the tile. There's no way to replant whatever is here. You can change it before you purchase the tile at outrageous expense, in my opinion. It goes from 1,000 to 5,000 to 25,000. Like, just even trying to get this is ridiculous. And in fact, the only way I got this set up was basically save scumming. If I didn't get a forest in the middle, I restarted the game, and I'd restarted this one in particular like 7 times. And basically, if you want the tile, since it's random, to show up properly, you save scum. You save, reload if you don't get what you want. That's the only way you can overcome the outrageous cost, which, frankly, if you're doing that, why are you doing that? Why is that part of the game? That seems like it's just a pointless mechanic. Why would you do that? And I feel that way about a lot of things in this game now. There are many things, since the game is so unforgiving of even a simple mistake, there are just many things that make sense to save scum. And in fact, I think the game is designed that way because if you look, there's like 1 billion save slots. So, like, why would you even struggle through it like I did, when really what I should have done through the series was gone through, been like, oh man, that's a shit episode, let me replay that and record it. Now, I could have done that. I mean, they're only 20-minute episodes, but I really don't have that much free time since I don't do this for a living, and I've got to get up for work the next day. But, I mean, that's how I should have played this. Again, why, though? Why would you make your players do that? That's not really on the players to reload for optimum results. That is your game being unfair. Because if we're looking at things like, well, okay, let's compare this right now. I was probably going to talk about this a little bit later, but let's compare this game to Postmaster, and I'll probably compare it a few times during this video. Postmaster was a game that I covered a couple years ago, and I pretty much went into it with as much information as I did this game. That's not entirely true. I think I may have played a little bit. I don't think I played a full game, but it wasn't completely blind like it was this game. But still, I didn't go in depth into information. I went through the tutorial, the in-game tutorial, and I came out of the game winning. That game was also a management/tycoon game, with elements of transportation in it. But still, it was a management game. And the thing that bothered me a lot, and probably threw me off a lot, and I complained about this, was that this isn't purely a management game. This is a clicker game with management elements. Now, in this game, right, you've got all these things over here. This, by the way, is completely worthless. I'll talk about Phylozera here in a minute. That you're clicking, you're waiting, you're clicking, clicking, click, click, click. And near the end there, the frustration, because I'm not that kind of player, right? If you've watched my videos before, I'm the kind of guy who sits, pauses the game, thinks about it, talks about it, and that's another part too, talking about my thought process. This happened pretty smoothly as compared to the actual series because I didn't have to talk, I didn't have to express my thoughts. I was doing this at the speed of thought. And Let's Playing, I mean, many Let's Players I think will agree that talking whilst playing a game is not optimal. You're not going to get the best gameplay that way. Some people are good at it, but I am definitely not one of those people. I have to actually sit and compose my thoughts before I do a thing. And when I have to voice that, and it takes 5 minutes to voice what I just thought, like speed of light in my head, I can see all this stuff, but then I have to sit for 3 minutes and explain it to you, what I'm doing. I mean, that just kind of, that throws off pacing. What throws off the pacing more in this game is when you've got to deal with like 5 seconds of a month before it switches, and then you've got to click and click and click and click and click and click. Oh, and then you've got fucking fruit flies and click, 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 click. And then, you know, it rains again, and then, oh shit, I gotta go back and retrim all that shit. And then I finish all that, and I sit here, and I'm looking at the board, and I'm like, what? Why didn't... Oh, shit. I forgot that I had something fermenting for 3 months and now it's gone bad. Or that I didn't sell bottles like I'd meant to. Because all of this bullshit was throwing me off here. I would rather this had been just a pure management game. And to fix this issue here, when you buy a tile, it should come with a worker. That should be part of the tile expense. And therefore, you should be able to set the worker without the research. I mean, the research nonsense makes sense in terms of building up to research things, but it doesn't really make sense in what you can research, what your research does. I feel that if you get a field, you need to get workers. And you can set them as the purchasable technology, you can set them to do what you need. I don't necessarily believe that the randomness of the weather patterns is bad. In fact, that seems to be a pretty important part of your harvest. But getting bogged down in this, whilst you've still got the management aspect of trying to sell and bottle your wine and you're waiting for all that stuff, just the balance there, I don't think is very good. It mixes micro and macro in a level that is not smooth. Because you're bogged down trying to cut and wait and cut and wait. And first of all, why even wait? Why is that a thing? There's a cost associated with this. When you get the 5-star thing, the cost goes away. True. But if you're paying for all of this, why is there also a timer on it? Either make it free with a timer, or make it cost something and instantaneous. And if you're good enough to get a 5-star rating that you get the 0 cost, then fine. It should be 0 cost, instantaneous, free clicking. Man, I'm kind of going all over the place here because my notes sort of bleed into each other through my grievances here. But anyway, my point is with this that a large part of my frustration was that I was asked to take attention away for what I felt was pointless. Trimming these things back manually was a complete waste of my time when I was really more focused on how am I going to sell my wine and getting the varieties, getting all that shit, pinpointed down to how it should be. I didn't care for this. I didn't care for having to come in here and do the Twitch clicking because it took my attention away. And I just don't operate that way, and it fucked me up. And because of that frustration, I missed a lot of things, namely the text. And here we get back to information. I read through this manual after the series, which I should have done perhaps during the series, but I think that this game gave its information out poorly. It's poorly designed information. Yes, there's a lot of hidden information in here, but see, okay, first of all, in real life, I am a designer. I do graphic design, web design, user interface design. And a part of that is that I have learned information should be redundant. So, for example, what I mean is that there's information in the manual that is not given out in the game, but it is pertinent to the game. Perfect example. Let's see. Wine making, is it? I think it's bottling is what I'm looking for. Come on, you motherfucker. Bottling. Okay. So this information right here, okay? Screws and bottle caps and corks, okay? Right down here, it tells you an important thing, which is that screw caps are cheaper and cost you less. And yeah, the total bottling cost, it allows you to sell more if you do corks and whatnot. But this is important. Wine critics with 3 stars or more, or I guess it's just more, so 4s and 5s, will never give you a 5-star rating if you use screw caps. Okay? There was another comment from a viewer that said something about how screw caps are meant for short-term selling and corks are for, like, if you're holding on to it for a while. I don't know if they were talking about, like, real-world winemaking, but that does not appear to be a part of this game. This is a part of this game. And there is absolutely no reason that this information could not show up on this screen in the game. Okay? Either as like a little question mark here that when you hover over it, it gives you a tooltip, or by hovering over the actual screw cap, whatever, this information should be redundant here. You should not have to go to the manual all the time to get it here. It should just be here. It could be in this description, which is basically nothing. This is just fluff. And that's the problem too, is that a lot of information is a combination of fluff and useful shit, and you don't know. I think there was a problem earlier when we were talking about grape varieties, right? So when you choose a grape in your tile, it gives you the whole thing. It gives you like the planting cost, it gives you the maintenance cost, it sort of tells you, at least in fluff, it gives you hints on how best to grow it. That information should also be here, in the manual. So kind of how Manual information should be in the game. Game information should be redundant in the manual. It should just be all here. None of it hidden, and especially because that information about the tile you only get by developing that tile. Which means, unless you play the game over and over again, the only way you know that is by buying the tile. Kind of like how you get all this worker information. This shit should be in the manual. Because the only way I can plan ahead for, well, let's see, I need to have this much money in the bank, but I also need that much renown. The only way I get that is if I build the tile. Well, first of all, I have to buy the tile, and that, the flat land, you essentially have to re-roll. So I'm putting in the expense of re-rolling the land, saving up to buy the worker house, which I don't know what it costs until I've developed it, and then it tells me you can build something there. So that's already another surprise there, unless you play the game. And then you get to it here, and it's like, oh, well, shit, now I can't even afford this. So the problem with that is that you've put expense into owning that tile and developing it, and now it is costing you money every month, and you cannot use it. That is terrible. In a management game where forethought is important, as they are in most tycoon games, having this information ahead of time is vital, because I can make better decisions if I know, well, I need this much money. If I know that I'm going to need 250 grand to build my tavern, because I'm going to need that in order to up my estate. That whole chain of thought is important. Another thing is that the tiles are permanent. I already complained about how you can't sell a tile, how you can't redevelop it or whatever. Things like the lake. The lake is worthless. Now, you can't just click on the lake and get information about it. You have to get it like this and get the tooltip here. Why that's not also here, I don't know. In fact, on an already developed tile, you get this, not on the lake. Why? Why isn't that there? Furthermore, in these little things, this is a perfect place to allow you to have a little sell button. So you can sell the thing, which seems to be implied in your financial state that you can sell your property. I mean, what is that? What even does that combine? But anyway, the reason the lake is useless is because it provides protection from Phylloxera for 50 years. Okay? 50 years. And then this tile is absolutely worthless. You can't do anything with it, but it continues to add expense to your monthly bill. What's that good for? Now, I know that there is a tile in here. It's like the lighthouse. And I believe that lighthouse is something you can put in there. So maybe that's what you're supposed to do, is that you get that lake, and once that lake is essentially worthless, then you ram a lighthouse in it. You get an instant renown, not a building cost, or a cumulative renown cost. It's just there. A one-time thing, bam, I get 100 renown. Okay. Why not allow me to reuse this? What did we just do there? I feel like I just accidentally did something. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not saving this. Point is, though, the management of the tiles and the actual physical estate are just, they're maddeningly unuseful. And I guess there's other things, too, that, like the improvements themselves on this, like I said, you don't know what they do until you buy this shit, and then you can determine, oh, well, shit, now I don't have enough for a tavern. But now you've got this empty tile, which is just going to sit there, and I could have used that in other ways, right? Another thing, I guess, now I'll just go down my list. Speaking of interface, though, the inconsistency of scrolling. I mentioned that many, many times, that there are places where you can, and I can't even fucking find one now, of course. There are many places in here where there's a scroll bar, and sometimes you can click on the scroll bar and it doesn't work. Sometimes you can scroll the mouse wheel and it doesn't work. And what was it? I think it's in the market. The market you can actually grab and drag, but there's other places where you can't, where the grab and drag doesn't work. So consistency there is nice. Maybe just a little thing, but it's another little thing that bothers me. Let's see. Okay, so like, the randomness to the game. See, the thing about a management game is that that's sort of a skill-based thing, and this goes into game design in general. Skill versus luck, okay? Skill-based games are games that you are meant to play again and again, and the biggest challenge then becomes you. I am supposed to be able to figure things out and then do better. And the whole the way this plateaus and inclines is that a challenge is presented. The difficulty then ramps up. A player then will get to a point where they plateau. They have mastered that skill and they plateau. The game then needs to provide another challenge. In this game, that would be, I guess, discovering the optimum stats for your grapes, which is another hidden bit of information I feel is completely worthless. Why keep that hidden? It just adds frustration to the game because you can do pretty well and then you put down Sara and you don't know how to do it. Or in my case, it was Sauvignon Blanc and then you get 0-star wine and it's like, well, fuck. Now I've just completely destroyed my game unless you save scum, as I had mentioned earlier. But this game has a lot of randomness to it, and that creates its own set of frustration. Now, as I said, I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing for this. Having the rain season, the sunny season, having all that stuff, I think it's vital to the design of the game, because you're growing things, and having the weather affect your croppage is important. When I was playing, though, the randomness was too much, and as I said, there was an update today that fixed the rainy seasons just a little bit, so they're a little bit less dramatic. There's another thing dealing with cash flow, as I said, so that you can actually now see your cash flow a little bit better, so you can gauge sort of what's going on there. And also, your debt is not as drastic. You can survive a little bit longer in the red. That itself is another thing, though, where you get to a point where early on, if you fuck up, you're fucked up. The amount of money you can take out in a loan, and I'm sorry, I'm being all over the place here, but this is just stream of conscious complaints. This loan stuff is pretty much useless early game because of the capped out on renown amount of money. By the time you take this loan, you don't have any more money. I mean, it just wears out so quickly, and I don't feel that's good. Getting back to the randomness, though, there are things that I think just should not be up to the player. Okay, for example, this chest and the things that it does. The weather itself, the Phylloxera, the rot, the fruit flies, all that stuff. In my opinion, those should be more of events. Time events. So you play along, fine, you can build up, fine, and then occasionally something comes along. Like maybe at, I don't know, year 2, year 3, the mayor event pops up. Because you don't really need this. You don't need this as an incentive to get a 5-star wine. You've already got the incentive, which is better sale prices, bigger quantities you can sell. That takes care of itself. This is unnecessary. Another thing would be like, I don't know, maybe in year 10 the war starts and you get that circumstance event, right? Maybe occasionally those are sort of like big long-term campaign events so that at points in time they happen. And then throughout, maybe once a year, you get the random one where it's like, oh, another ancestor died and you get your $2,000 or whatever. I don't feel that this is necessary. And same with the infestations and all the ailments, okay? There's no reason those need to just be random numbers with this might happen to your crops this year or this month and then it disappears because of, like, fruit rot, for example, is tied to your ripeness. If you have a ripeness less than 3, you're going to get fruit rot. Why not just make that an event? Like, oh no, this year's crop is diseased, or this year's crop has fruit flies. Because here's the thing, right? This doesn't always work. In particular, Phylloxera. Now, I said I was going to talk about this, and I am. Phylloxera is a hopeless disease, okay? Now, the reason I put this lake down here was to fight an infestation. It does not do that. Once you have Phylloxera, you have Phylloxera. This is merely meant to not treat Phylloxera. It will not treat it and cure it and get rid of it. It is meant to prevent the 10% chance that your crop will die when it has it. In other words, it's worthless because, as I was saying earlier, I would rather just let this thing die so that I can plant a better crop once I've got all my basics done and taken care of. Whatever. Putting down a lake does not, in fact, do anything with this. It will not get rid of it. So why do that? Now, I know it's not actually down here right now, but it comes back. It's just in there all the time. Another thing is that you do not treat fruit flies and Phylloxera at the same time. It will make your plant toxic. Yeah, would have been nice to know that. I guess we can just go straight into those ailments. One thing I did not appreciate during the series was that the ailments are hugely detrimental. Fruit flies alone, when they start in the winter, and first of all, why do we still have fruit flies buzzing around in the winter? I don't understand that. I don't understand why they can last in your crops all year long. But anyway, fruit flies start in winter, before anything is grown, at 5% reduced yield. They then go to 15% every month. This explains why, once I started curing my fruit flies, the amount I made jumped dramatically. However, this also compounds itself with fruit rot, and I don't think Phylloxera itself affects the crop yield. But those two things, if you get fruit rot and fruit flies, then you're down like 45% yield every month. Okay? Now, fine. You need to treat that shit. You need to deal with it. The fruit rot thing, you need to make sure your ripeness gets above 3. Well, fine, but again, because of randomness in the weather, you can't always get that. I mean, I could keep it trimmed down to nothing, and it's not going to grow until June, but by then I've already lost, 3 months of growth because we still had fruit rot. Whatever. But the problem with curing this is that in order to do that, you need to research it. And you can't research it because you don't have the money to research it. And you don't have the renown. That's perhaps the more important thing. You can get the money pretty easily. It's the renown. Now, this is where this monoculture idea actually hits a brick wall, because if I had the Cabernet in 2 fields and my Chardonnay in 2 fields, what that essentially gives me is 2 chances a year as opposed to 1 to get 5 stars. And those 5 stars are what ultimately give you your renown based on your reviewers. Again, why? Because you're essentially given a problem that extends the problem, right? Like, it would take me, I think it took me like 5 years to be able to afford this. Maybe 6, I don't know. But it was because I had that double whammy on all my crops. And so it put me behind because I wasn't getting a big enough yield, and it just completely fucked me over. I don't find that compelling. I'm sorry, I just don't. Because it's essentially wasting my time in a way that is not really a challenge so much as just random fate. Again, random fate being that, well, and again, this is something they fixed, supposedly, in the update. You might get late rains all the way to August. And so you can you can't keep these things trimmed to a point where your ripeness is going to be worth a shit. Is that your fault? No, because the game didn't give you the sunny days it needed to grow. And so you're penalized for that. And that's fine in itself, but again, this game is so unforgiving of mistakes that if you have a very poor yield, your expenses will just eat your money to the point that 2 bad years in a row and you're fucked. And so you got to play it again. And again, for me, that's not fun. That's not worth my time. That is another situation where it's like, well, I'm glad I made a save state 3 instances ago because now I'm going to reload that one and try it again. That 2 steps forward, 1 step back approach is sloppy, wasteful, lazy. I don't know. It's not compelling. At least not to me. God, what else? This video has been going on a bit longer. Another thing, too, I guess, is separate harvesting. The whole thing that I was talking about earlier, where selling a tile and then replacing it with another crop later, something like the clay or the sand or whatever that you may want, could be slightly alleviated if you didn't harvest everything at the same time, right? Because we saw that the Sara did very well being overexposed. I mean, there's no reason for you not to let it be overexposed. The problem is you can't let it be overexposed. Because if you do that, then all your other shit gets overexposed. Not necessarily, because you don't have to trim back every bush. You can just trim back the ones that need it and whatever and let the other ones grow and try to balance that shit. But I wouldn't have to go to that micro level if I could just say, okay, harvest this grape. And, you know, the Cabernet isn't quite where I want it, so I'm going to let it sit for another month. Right? And then you see that in the brewing process, not brewing process, but, you know, the fermenting and the pressing and all that stuff. It is entirely cumulative. Once you get in there, you can select, well, I want my Cabernet to be 2 weeks of fermenting and my Chardonnay to be a month or whatever to get the stats to balance, and it takes the longest one, which means that you have to wait until your longest one is done before you can sell any of the others. And that lump sum approach is not always good, because sometimes I need some fucking cash right now so I can afford the bottling of my Chardonnay. You know what I mean? Like, that came into play a lot, too, where I just didn't have the money. Because 90% of the year I'm sitting here twiddling my thumbs waiting for something to happen until I have some money, and all I can do is watch my cash flow disappear. I don't know. I just don't find... and I certainly did not find that interesting, and it was just frustrating. You know, this micro-level thing just didn't need to be a thing. Again, going back to Postmaster, there was no micro-level minigame. You know, you set up a new post office, you hired employees, if you needed to expand, you hired more employees and whatever little improvements inside the building, and it essentially took care of itself. You had to set up the routes, yes, but you didn't have to drive the vehicle. There was no mail sorting mini-game where you had to click the stamp and check and make sure there was a stamp on it and postage was correct, and that would have made the game terrible. And it wasn't in the game because it wasn't that type of game. It was a management game. This game tried to break the mold a little bit, fine, fair enough. It tried to do something a little bit different, fair enough. In my opinion, it failed. In my opinion, it didn't need that. It could have just been a straight-up management game. And especially given the atmosphere that it tries, you know, between the graphics and the music and the relaxed, you're just growing some wine atmosphere, it very much is not. At least it wasn't for me. I get frustrated as shit when I don't know something, and again, when I got distracted trying to maintain the thing, the trimming of my vines, leaves, and all that, and battling the rain and whatnot, and then I forgot that, oh yes, there's a whole bunch of shit in my cellar right now that is either worthless or has been waiting to sell, and now I'm in the red because I didn't sell it in time, whatever. You know, it was just too distracting because I was bouncing in and out of micro and macro level. And so I just don't think the game kind of knew what it wanted to be, which is unfortunate. What really is more unfortunate, though, is that there's an option to do that. There's an option to just take yourself out of the micro level with the workers and the whatnot, but you can't get them. Not right away. I mean, 75 grand when you're first starting out is a lot of money. It'd be very, very important, very, very helpful to rapid growth early in the game, but it's out of your reach. And that's another thing about the game, too, that I think, is that I feel prices and costs are way out of whack. I feel like this renown thing should have just been cumulative, so once you hit 10, it unlocks, not you spend 10 renown. But given that there is also a tavern, and there's a whole mechanic for rapidly gaining it, I guess I can see what they were going for. I just don't feel like it was implemented all that well. I feel like it would have just been better one way or the other. Again, why is there not research for now selling? Why is that, you can research this thing to change your tiles. Why isn't there, where's the thing about selling your real estate? I don't know. Is that even a thing in the game? Is it just implied and it's wrong? I don't know. I don't know. And maybe that's something else too. Again, I mentioned that I should have played this game when I had more information, but at the same time there wasn't information. And that's kind of a lazy approach, because you can look at indie games like, let's say, Stardew Valley. When I started that series, there was an entire wiki official wiki. In other words, the developers made a wiki. They gave all the information they knew about the game out to the public. And I went to that wiki and I looked so that I could make better decisions about gifts I was going to give, crops, whatever, right? There was absolutely no reason the developers of this game could not have done the same thing, especially if they were going to go to the trouble of a manual that is incomplete at best. It's really a half tutorial, and that's something else I wanted to touch on too, I guess. But let me finish my thought here. There's no reason they couldn't have just given all that information. Clearly the developers knew how to play the game, and it feels to me like they fell into that classic trap of, well, we know, but we're bad at explaining it. Or there's things we miss because we just assume you know, like, that happens a lot, not just in this game. That happens in a lot of indie games, I think. But yeah, going back again, a lot of my trials and tribulations, I admit, could be considered my own fault, because I could have read the information. I could have test played a game. I could have watched other videos. That's all true. Another thing that's true, though, is that I should not have had to do that. And the reason I say that is because this game had an in-game tutorial, right? That in-game tutorial taught you really not even the basics of the game. It taught you basically how to use the interface. It taught you the gist of the game, and it put the rest in this manual and said, well, you'll just have to learn the game on your own. As I touched on at the very beginning of this game, that was completely unnecessary. There's no reason you couldn't put information here in the game. Tooltips hovering over to tell you things. More informative menus. See, here we got Philo Zero. This is now going to be a thing. I mean, there's so much more they could have done to make the game accessible. And I know, whatever, I grew up in the age of manuals. That's not a thing, okay? Like, I remember a time when, before in-game tutorials, I remember when they started in-game tutorials, but I remember a time when you had to read the manual to know how to play the game. And those manuals were thick. They were books because they weren't just manuals on every detail of the game, and I mean every detail of the game, but they'd also have like 50 pages of a story in it or something. I mean, if you look at the manual for Pharaoh, the city builder game, Pharaoh, each of those chapters starts with a little story about this guy who traveled to like Thebes or Memphis or something like that. Like, it's just a little bit of flavor text. You don't see that in games anymore. And you don't see that in games anymore for a freaking reason, because manuals are a thing of the past. Like, just because I grew up with manuals doesn't mean I'm always going to read them, especially if you're not forcing me to at the beginning of the game. A lot of those concepts should have been, if you're going to do an in-game tutorial, a lot of those concepts should have been provided in that tutorial. It holds your hand for a little bit, and you should either have the option A, of having the tutorial at all, like most games, or B, you have tutorial missions, and it tells you everything you need to know as you go through those tutorials. Again, the compromise is just to have things like this in the menus, in tooltips, telling you exactly what you need to know, the little nuances, whatever. That would have been much more helpful to learning the game. And another thing, I guess, too, is that a lot of that information, as I said, is kind of obscured, because there's a lot of flavor fluff on some of these things that don't tell you anything useful. And then you look at something like when I was doing the pressing at the very end of the series. I didn't notice this until someone mentioned what happened, and then I went back and looked back at the video. When you do the pressing, first of all, you have to go to all the expense of finally unlocking your upgrade here in the estate, right? That upgrade then gives you level 2 everything. When you go to the presses, they have their own cost, and I'm sure everything has its own cost. So that extra $100, or $100,000, was actually the cost of then being able to unlock a new pressing technique. I didn't see that because that wasn't on the button. The button said unlock, and I didn't even pay attention to that because why would I? The button looks exactly like it did before. And so that's when I clicked on it and I said, well, didn't I already click on this? No, I did not. What I actually did was I paid the unlocking cost, and then I actually pressed the thing. But the cost, that 100,000, was hidden over here in other text. Fluff text. Combined with informational text. That's just bad design. Like, yes, it's my fault, technically, for glancing over that and not just sitting here and reading everything. But it's also bad design that it didn't just have that big black button say, unlock for $100,000 or whatever. Or having it a different color so that it's just, you know, or even having it over here. Something to differentiate it so you're not just going click, 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 click. What? You know? I don't know. I clearly got frustrated with the game early on, and because I just batch record, which is perhaps another mistake for blind Let's Plays, I went, it just accumulated, and it snowballed, and I got to the point where I was so frustrated with the game that I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. I wasn't slowing down to take the time to read everything, and perhaps that's, again, as I say, my own fault for not playing the game previous to that. In my own defense, though, I don't fucking have time for that. I am a grown adult with a job, and I do this as a hobby, as I have always done ever since I started the channel. Playing a game on my own for an hour and then recording it versus recording it now and just throwing it on YouTube, like, I don't know. I mean, that's a personal decision, admittedly, but still, like, I have never had a problem with that before with other games. I don't know why this one had to be that way. Whatever. I don't know. That I've got a few other things written down. I think I've probably covered them, but just overall, I don't think I had a very satisfying experience with this game for a multitude of reasons that I hopefully have expressed thoroughly now. Unfortunately, you know, I only played this to kind of prove a point to myself and just to see, okay, what did I do wrong? How easy is this game actually to master? Unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever play it again. Like, this is getting uninstalled and it's going on the back burner because I've got 30 other games in my Steam library alone. Just in Steam games, I have other games in my actual library to play, and it's just not worth my time. So, disappointing, because I was actually kind of looking forward to this, and once I saw it was a tycoon game, management style game, I was like, hey, that's right up my alley. It wasn't quite. And so I guess in my final review, I have to give this game 3 stars, because I guess the concept was decent, but the execution left a sour taste in my mouth. So, thanks for watching. I guess I guess it was disappointing all across the board, and I apologize for the frustration that it apparently caused you. Fair enough, you didn't have to watch, but it was just a bad series, and hopefully in future we'll be able to prevent other series like this. Anyway, I'll see you next time.